Good evening and welcome everyone. My name is Iante Mosselman. I'm a program editor here at the Balie. Very happy to see you all here and that you chose this sweaty, well not yet sweaty, but sweaty room over the beautiful weather outside. Tonight we'll talk about oligarchy and I'm going to do an introduction, but before that I have one important thing to say, and that is that if you want to ask a very inappropriate question, that is something you will have to do at the bar because we have a live stream tonight. So your question will otherwise be recorded on the internet and be there forever. So just leave it. Welcome to the age of oligarchy, where money buys you influence and where the rich and powerful like to mingle and party, and where self-enrichment, corruption and tax evasion are commonplace, where democracy is threatened by the ultra-wealthy. And in this first episode of a 4-part series, we dissect the modern oligarchy, and we do that by talking for a big part about Evgeny Lebedev, because his case is such a good example of what can happen if you don't pay attention. And I'm doing that with two fantastic speakers. Paul Caruana Galizia, he's an investigative reporter at the Financial Times. He became a journalist in 2018 after his mother's Daphne's assassination, I have to say it right. She was murdered because of her research that she did on corruption in Malta. He has won 10 journalism awards and he's also received the Magnitsky and the Anderson Lucas Norman Awards for campaigning for justice for his mother. He made a podcast Londongrad. I don't know if you listened to it, but it's an incredible story. And he writes really in-depth articles about what is going on with the money of Viktor Orban, with the money of Trump. He's incredibly brave, so I'm very happy that he's with us today. We will also be joined by Pieter Omtzigt, who is a former politician and member of the Dutch Parliament, but for a long time he was part of the Council of Europe, where he also did incredible investigation and research on the functioning of rule of law in Malta, but also on corruption and how corruption is also rooted in the Council of Europe and in our democracies. So I'm very happy to have them both. I'm going to start with you, Paul, so if you would please join me on stage, that would be wonderful. Please give him a warm applause. So maybe to start, Evgeny Lebedev, how did you first end up covering his story? And can you tell us a little bit about who he is for the people who don't know?
Of course. Thank you for that very kind introduction, first of all. And thank you all so much for coming. So Evgeny Lebedev, in summary, is a member of the House of Lords, which is the UK's upper chamber of parliament, where people sit for life. So they're sent there by politicians, most are sent by the sitting Prime Minister, and they're life appointments. Weirdly, members also get a title, so he's formerly Lord Lebedev. He was interesting to us because before being made a member of the Lords by Boris Johnson, he was really only known for hosting parties with celebrities, high-profile people in London, politicians, people from the arts, and so on. And he was very close to Boris Johnson. They had this really unlikely but close friendship. So in 2020, his peerage was announced. No one really noticed, weirdly, because no one really cared. The House of Lords had by then developed this reputation as a place where politicians put cronies and donors and so on. Mm-hmm. But I remember a few months later, my editor at the time saying to me, I think this is completely outrageous. Mm-hmm. He has absolutely no qualifications to be in Parliament, and he's now there for life. I want to know what happened. And I thought, okay, as commissions go, that's like
that's fine.
Yeah, find out what happened. And I remember by Christmas time 2021, we had the kind of outline of the story. Evgeny was a close ally and supporter of Boris Johnson. So another thing to know about Evgeny is he owned and still owns a chunk of London's most important paper, the Evening Standard. And he also owned the Independent. And those papers really supported Johnson when Johnson was mayor of London, and supported Johnson politically throughout his career, really. So the idea was there was this quid pro quo, you know?
He got the seat.
Yes, exactly. The seat
in
was,
exchange of support.
Yes, exactly. And Johnson was generally like that. He would give things to friends.
A generous man.
Generous man. He also did it, and he would admit to this, to make a mockery out of the institution. Because by then he had formed this identity as a kind of anti-establishment person. And what is more establishment than the House of Lords, right?
Yes.
So it was his way of sticking a finger up at it, sending his friend in there. So by Christmas time, I thought that would be the story, one of patronage, cronyism, corruption, really. But then, of course, 2 months later, Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And then I thought, actually, there's a much bigger story. And the one thing about Evgeny I didn't deliberately forget to mention is his father was a KGB officer and actually then went on to work with the FSB and then became an oligarch, which is where the money for the newspapers came and the parties and so on. And it's so funny that that fact just didn't really figure in how any of us thought about Evgeny up until Russia's invasion. And then it kind of started dawning on us. I'm embarrassed by this description of journalism, but it started dawning on us that the real story is, of course, that there is now someone with a seat for life in Parliament whose father was a very senior member of Russian intelligence. And it's where all the wealth came from, right? Russian assets. And so the story changed character in that way, but in a much broader way, in that Evgeny became a kind of vehicle through which we were able to tell the UK's long history with Russia.
Because what you describe, the father of Evgeny, Alexander Lebedev, at a certain point, first when the Russians come to London, they buy houses. But then the father buys 2 newspapers. First, the Evening Standard for only £1 and a commitment to invest £25 million. And then he's the first Russian to own a UK newspaper.
Yes.
And then he buys another one as well after that, The Independent, with a £9 million investment commitment. And was there not an outcry about this? How could this happen?
There really wasn't, because it happened when Britain was really thankful for Russian money and really kind of celebrated it. So the early mid-2000s, in that first wave of Russian money flowing into the West, especially the UK. And it's funny looking back, because they really were celebrities. Like Roman Abramovich wasn't just a rich man who bought Chelsea Football Club. He was glamorous, and there were magazine pieces about him, and magazine pieces about wife 1, wife 2, wife 3, and the house he bought in Knightsbridge, and it was really fun. It was a fun story. The interesting thing about the Lebedevs was they were in the kind of league of oligarchs, not major oligarchs. So they never had enough money to buy a big football club or really big assets. But in a way, they did something much more sophisticated, because buying a newspaper, supporting up-and-coming politicians, which Johnson was at the time, is such a more effective route into British society and politics. So within the space of a few years, they became these really central figures really well connected, really well known. People wanted to hang out with them, go to their house. They wanted to be with them all the time.
Yeah. And many celebrities, politicians, people who you wouldn't expect, they also did. Who surprised you the most? Who was friends with is friends or was with the Lebedevs?
I don't know if they. I mean, Johnson isn't really surprising because he's, you know what I mean. He'll make a friend of anyone. But then there were a lot of Labour politicians where I was surprised. You know, they were so kind of involved in that world. People who've now are more famous for other friendships. So Peter Mandelson, who's in the news because of Epstein a lot. Tony Blair was quite close to him. But really anyone, anyone with any kind of power.
It's interesting, I think, and I wonder why did they want to buy these newspapers?
Again, I think it's because they do two things. They mean you become a person who politicians want to suck up to, right? Because papers were still very influential then when they bought them. So to have the support of the Independent or the Evening Standard really did mean a lot. And another thing is it gave you this kind of foothold in really specifically English society. So the papers would host awards, they would host parties and so on. So then, and you would use them to review books, music, blah, blah, blah. And so it allowed them to get into both those worlds, the kind of media, political and celebrity class, in a way that Roman Abramovich was never able to, just by buying a football club.
How much influence did you think it gave them? And also because you speak about what happened with Brexit in your podcast as well, and it was really mind-blowing for me because you describe a dinner that they had with Boris Johnson where he decided that he was going to support Brexit, and Evgeny Lebedev was there.
That's right, yeah. There was the private dinner, which was at Boris and his now ex-wife's house, Marina Wheeler. Yeah, it's really amazing, actually. It was one of those moments in the story where I realized, my God, he's everywhere. You know what I mean? It was the most intimate, private political moment in that country's recent history, where one of its most influential politicians was kind of brainstorming, am I going to come out in favor of Brexit or not? And really the subtext there was, if he did, Johnson, then Brexit is going to happen because he was that influential. And Evgeny was there, kind of encouraging him. And it was really a striking kind of moment in the storytelling, I thought. And of course, the relationship developed from there, right? Because Johnson did become very, very powerful in government. And there were other moments, other parties. I don't know, maybe you're going to talk about them, so I won't jump ahead.
Right. Well, I think it might be nice if we listen to a little bit of it. That also describes their relationship, I think. And then you also, if you haven't listened to the podcast, have a small idea of it. This is the... well, no, you introduce it perfectly, so I'm not going to say anything.
At the bottom of an obscure government webpage listing ministerial hospitality, there's a very brief entry for Saturday, the 28th of
Is dit de tweede?
2018.
Okay. It's really incredible.
Yeah. I also really don't like listening to the sound of my own voice. So.
Sorry for putting you through that. But so I think we have a picture of it, because what I was wondering as well of Boris Johnson, Hanover. Yes, of course I have a picture of it. Yeah. This is him, and then at the airport, and he's spotted. And you wrote about this. Many people wrote about this, and nothing happened. When there was a call scheduled with Lavrov, which is also outrageous.
It's outrageous. The whole thing was outrageous. And it was so wild, that period in British government. But it was also, I think, it was one of the issues was people were only just adjusting to thinking about Russia in a new way, in a less naive way. And really, I mean, maybe people in this room will be more aware, journalists tend to be more aware. But when this podcast came out in the summer of 2022, it was really shocking to a lot of people, the proximity between Johnson, again, who was foreign secretary at the time, and people like Evgeny and Alexander, his father. It was really like the sense that, my God, we've sleptwalk into this crazy situation. But then on the kind of Johnson, the unmonitored call and so on, it was really typical of the way he governed generally. And he governed in that way as prime minister, he was like that as foreign secretary. I mean, everything about that trip was wrong. Foreign secretaries should never travel alone, right? They should always have close protection officers. If they're going to do government business, they should have civil servants with them. It should be logged. It was completely outrageous. Yeah.
There's a question you ask in this fragment as well, and it's about the potential compromise. And I was wondering, was he compromised?
Well, he says no, and everyone who went to that house says no. But the Italian accented voice you heard was talking about a report prepared by Italy's Foreign Intelligence Agency, which had been monitoring this palazzo in Umbria, literally watching people coming and going to it. Including Tony Blair, right? There's a mention of Tony Blair going, and Boris Johnson, of course. And the suspicion throughout the report is yes. Certainly, politicians would have been embarrassed if any of what happened inside emerged publicly. And
tell us, what is the wildest thing that you found? Yes, just to give you an idea.
I can't remember what's actually in the book. There were some really outrageous parties. The difficulty was this. The parties where politicians attended, people were incredibly tight-lipped. The parties where celebrities attended, of course, a lot of drugs and prostitutes and all the rest of it. But even one party that is in the podcast is about a party that Johnson attended as foreign secretary with a lot of other people, including his wife at the time, his brother, who is now also in the Lords, and other politicians. And Evgeny used to do this thing where he'd invite all these serious people, but then also invite, in a cruel game, someone they could make fun of without that person knowing. In this case, they invited a glamour model, a woman called Katie Price, who her whole adult life would kind of pose topless in the tabloids and had many troubled relationships and is disfigured by various cosmetic procedures and so on. So Evgeny flew her over to this party and filled her with champagne on the way, so she turned up drunk. Anyway, later they were sitting at a table to eat, and part of the way the evening would work is they would go around the table asking people to say something in praise of Evgeny.
Yes.
But when it came to Katie Price, they skipped over her because she was just there for entertainment, right? Not to say anything serious, they thought. She was obviously upset by this and started getting really rowdy and drunk, and offered to show people her breasts, including the foreign secretary.
Who was sitting next to her?
Sitting right next to her. And then it's really too vulgar to say. I feel
No, it's okay.
like
You leave it. We'll leave it for the podcast. But what interests me so much about it is this is tactic.
Yes, it is. It is. Look, a foreign secretary should not be in that position.
Never. No.
And even on the most kind of naive analysis that it was a bit of fun or harmless, joking around, it was bad, right? And it was something, simply put, that Johnson wouldn't have wanted to be reported on. And that is enough. That is enough to provide for a blackmail threat, which is ultimately what we, the voting public, care about.
Yeah.
And anyway, there were many parties like that. And that, again, that Italian foreign intelligence agency report, it documents a long kind of history of this kind of thing.
Maybe we listen to another short fragment, if that's okay.
Boris Johnson's priorities as the newly elected Prime Minister were... Yeah, so that is the hard edge of this story. So in a funny way, it started with the peerage, but we thought it was a really, really kind of conventional cronyism story. But as you've just heard, it became a much more serious story. I mean, as a side note, the secrecy of the British state is really extraordinary. And working as a journalist on stories like this is a complete nightmare. Civil servants, unfortunately, take the Official Secrets Act very seriously. So it's very hard to get anything out there. In this case, there were these little holes that opened up in the picture through this House of Lords Appointments Commission, for example, which is a totally useless body that vets nominees. And we used that as a kind of way in, you know, we saw a little light coming through and you tug at it and more comes through. The amazing thing is, after the podcast came out, as is typical, you know, more people start talking and coming to you. And we published the story as a written piece.
Yes.
That MI5, so which covers domestic security, actually sent 2 officers to Downing Street.
Really?
To brief Boris Johnson on exactly this issue, to say, look, this is a real concern. You sent him there, he's there for life, we can't get him out. We really advise you, and we can only do that, we can only advise you, don't do it. And he just ignored their advice and made the appointment anyway.
And there's nothing that can be done about this.
I mean, I think his peers, so other members of the Lords, can have a vote on stripping him of his title. But it will never happen.
No.
There was enormous pressure for it to happen, up through the Commons and into the Lords. But it is just one of these things that politicians never kind of take seriously, maybe because they all feel it can happen to them, you know.
You said just there that it is very difficult as a journalist to work in Britain on these sort of stories. You've also you research the Trump administration. You've researched Orban extensively. You've researched a politician from Bangladesh. All of these stories all around the world. Is it exceptionally hard in Britain, or is it hard everywhere?
I would say it's definitely harder in Britain than the US.
Why?
I think in the US people value the role of the press a lot more. They're like great believers in the free press, despite all the kind of headline news about Trump suing this paper and that paper. But the average person believes in the role of journalists and the power of journalism and so on. I think the attitude towards the press in Britain is generally actually quite hostile because of the tabloids having such a bad reputation. And then in other countries, I mean, the other 2 stories you mentioned were made easier in that they were really straightforward corruption stories. I don't know how much you want to get into them, but with Orban it was huge public procurement corruption. So in the end it was a very technical job of going through hundreds of thousands of public contracts and finding out who won them and so on. But the UK has this special challenge in that its kind of default mode is total secrecy, especially on national security.
Maybe one more question before I invite Pieter to join us. And that is, so I wonder how unique this story is. If you look at all the Russian money that entered London, and in what way has London changed? Because not only this, but because of the welcoming of the wealthy oligarchs.
So the uniqueness of this story is that he got a seat for life in Parliament. And the irony is, like there there was so much he could have done. He decided he wanted this. I think he wanted it because he wanted a title. He wanted to be called Lord Lebedev and Baron Evgeny of whatever his title is. But he is one of many Russian oligarchs who bought up a lot of real estate, a lot of assets in London specifically. How it changed London in the run-up to the full-scale invasion of Ukraine is all the things you'd expect. So certain neighborhoods became purely kind of oligarch neighborhoods. And of course, they're rarely ever in these houses. Certain schools became oligarch children's schools. And it softened, and this is the more serious point, Britain's approach to Russia. So a bit in the podcast is on Alexander Litvinenko's murder in 2006, so the former Russian spy who was poisoned with polonium. A murder which was completely outrageous and brazen, but wasn't taken seriously in any way until the Skripal poisonings in 2018, when finally Britain said, okay, we'll do a public inquiry. How it's changed since the invasion is really dramatic, actually. So the government, or various governments, went from attracting and welcoming Russian oligarchs and selling huge assets to them, to sanctioning them, to completely freezing all their mansions, forcing the sale of Chelsea Football Club. So a complete turnaround, which frankly is pretty hypocritical, whichever way you look at it. But there we are.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Pieter, if you would please join us as well, that would be wonderful. One thing that is said in the podcast is that Britain was very cheap. British politicians were very cheap to buy. How is that with European politicians? Would you say the same of them?
Oh, yes.
Yes?
Yeah.
Why?
Now, first of all, I'm surprised you only go to London. If you want to have Russian money, you only have to go about 4 miles from here. Zuidas, full of it. And Ukrainian oligarchs as well, by the way. We had an active policy of the Netherlands. We had special, in the late 2010s, we had special investor attractor events at the Dutch embassy in Ukraine, for instance, in which all these oligarchs, which you really don't want to have, were invited to do business here, organized by the Dutch government. There's a lot of money here. And the lawyer for the Dutch state in the Yukos affair, the lawyer for the Russian state in the Yukos affair, wasn't made peer, but he did get a live appointment in the Dutch High Court. So in case you were wondering and think things only happen in
London.
London, then look at Amsterdam or The Hague. Russia has been, or look at Germany, for instance, where they obviously bought a former prime minister who's fully on board on the whole Russian case. So Russia has done a lot to soften this up. Now you ask me how cheap it is to buy politicians. In the Council of Europe, my party leader got about 5 million from Azerbaijan, and the others got only 10 or 20,000, or probably 100,000, to vote in favor of Azerbaijan. There are rumors that Russia also did it, but it wasn't proven. I did manage. Azerbaijan is a small country in the Caucasus, next to Georgia and Armenia. Azerbaijan had an interest in getting the Nagorno-Karabakh back. Azerbaijan had an interest in showing it was a democracy, whereas it's just as democratic as the Russian Federation. It is not. And they bribed everyone in the Council of Europe to make sure that they won the votes. And they won the votes. And they did so by organizing trips with gifts with business class flights, with five-star hotels, probably also with the things he didn't want to mention, which would never happen in Amsterdam, would they? No. This is happening far more than we think, and we're actually, in my view, the Dutch press is always focused on the wrong thing with politicians. It's sort of going, if one politician sort of has one dinner too many, then we sort of try to vilify him. But the real problem
They have
here,
too many bonnetjes.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Little receipts.
And really, I can tell you, I mean, even some politicians I hate, I sometimes understand the stress they're under if they're a minister and whatever, and they run COVID and they have foreign affairs. That they don't always look whether the private affairs is fair. In the Netherlands, you get a big newspaper article if it's 20 or 30 euros too much, and then you think, I understand, yeah. But yeah, some countries really need this kind of influence because they're doing nasty things. Russia was planning to do a lot of things, like getting obviously new territory in Ukraine and in Georgia and in Moldova and maybe in the Baltic states. So they were very strategic in planning all these kinds of influence. And there's a lot of planning from the KGB. And we always think it's an incident. It's not an incident. They're planning in all these countries to have influence at the highest level. And here they are, influence. And so sometimes it goes by accident. What I told you, behind the scenes, there actually been a lot more discussion on why this particular lawyer from Amsterdam got to the High Court than there was publicly. But yeah, the one thing is you can blame the Russians for a lot of things, or the Azeri, but they have long-term policy goals. So they're working on this for 20 years. Putin knows that he at some point wanted to do something to invade Ukraine because in his view, worldview, Ukraine is part of Russia. And we usually run from one policy argument to another and seem to forget the completely long line. Because already in 2006, when Litvinenko was killed on the streets of Mayfair, Litvinenko was called with polonium. Yeah. Does anyone know why Litvinenko was killed? Just in the public. Any clue? What? Traitor. And why was he? What was he treason for? It's not a bad answer, by the way. Well, he actually did the investigation after the bombings, or 1999 apartment bombings, in which 300 Russian citizens died. And these bombings were done right after Putin rose to power, and before he had to win the elections. So Putin came to power as a completely unknown guy, KGB, and you see that even as a Dutch or an English guy, you see that Putin is not the great communicator. So he had to win elections in 2 months after coming to power because Boris Yeltsin, having drunk too much and something else, had to leave the presidency. Apartment bombings happened every week. Compare this to 9/11. It's total fear in Moscow. 300 people have died. And then, a strange thing happens, that someone who's really awake finds that bombs are being placed in the basement of an apartment. And the cars are being traced back to the KGB. And Litvinenko wrote a book about this, in which he traced back that it had been the KGB doing this. So the reason and that book was obviously prohibited in Russia and whatever. So the reason he was killed was very clear. It had to be a warning from Putin that anyone who would tell the truth on what he was doing would not just be punished, but would face a medieval type of death sentence. Polonium is extremely difficult and extremely expensive to use. It costs millions. It's quite difficult to get the right amount in, and it's not very stable if you want to travel with it. It would not be the thing you would want to use if you want to go for an easy kill. And yet, we didn't treat it for that, we had in the newspaper, oh, this is happening and this poor guy is dying. Not, Putin is trying to take out one of his enemies. In 2008, I spoke to Trepashkin. Trepashkin was the other one doing the investigation. I spoke to him in a Duma, because I was able to organize a hearing with whistleblowers in Russia. And Trepashkin told this story. All the Russians walked out, obviously. That was, in 2008, it was a bit more easier to do these things than they would be in 2020, because Russia obviously went straight down. And from that point to the insiders, it was clear all the way. So if you go back to the Dutch AIVD reports, the Dutch Secret Service reports, they have been warning for 15 years for Russia, just like the English Secret Service. They've been extremely clear what Russia was trying to get influence, because they look at long lines, they see what's going on. And what did the Netherlands do? We bought part of Nord Stream 2. Our king had a beer at the wrong place at the wrong time with Putin at the Sochi Games. And we only woke up after MH17 in 2014. And not even then fully. Because we've had very double standards. The amount of Russian money here is extremely large.
But is it only the money, or is there something else why we did not see this as a threat? Paul, what do you think?
Is it whether it's only money or...
Or is there something else why, even though the secret services were warning...
Well, I think there was always... Look, in the UK, there was always this tension between what, let's say, elected politicians wanted, which is huge inflows of Russian money, and they would frame it as, look, this is good for the UK, but also good for Russia, because we're welcoming Russia into the Western liberal order. And then the tension was with the kind of machinery of government. So in the UK, MI5 and 6 saying, look, there is something really worrying here. These are people who aren't simply rich businessmen. That concept doesn't exist in Russia. They're agents of the Russian government, right? Because you can't become an oligarch without the Kremlin's enablement. But that was the kind of balancing act, which in the end went the wrong way, we now know.
Okay. Maybe I want to move towards something that we already briefly touched upon, and that is, so there are these Russian oligarchs, but as you've already said, it's not only, the oligarchy is not only a Russian thing, it was also present in the Council of Europe, looking at Europe. And Paul, you've written extensively also on Viktor Orban and his system of oligarchy. And I want to move a bit more to the system and how that works. And I'm just going to quote you, because you wrote about Laszlo Sici. How did you say his first name?
I would say the way you just said it.
Okay, I'm not. Thank you. Let's keep it like that. My Hungarian is not very fluent. But he was Viktor Orban's oldest friend. And you wrote an article where since Orban was elected in 2010, he won a bevy of contracts worth 7.9 billion, which is so much money, I can't even imagine it.
Yeah.
And you researched how this went. And can you tell me about sort of this how does that go? The system, how it works? Because it's a lot of money to give to your childhood friend.
Yeah, you know. I know. We should all have friends like that.
How do you do it?
I think it's true. It's true. Corruption works differently in different places. In this story, which we published a few weeks before the elections in Hungary, we looked at public procurement. Now, there had been allegations that Orban was awarding public contracts to his friends and supporters for many years. The nice thing about it being an EU member state is it has to publish its public contracts, what they're for, who wins them, how much they're worth, and so on. the challenge as a reporter was, of course, the contracts are not won by the named individuals, but by a company they own, or a company they have a shareholding in, or a company their son-in-law owns, or so on. So the real job in this story was mapping out or uncovering the owners of these companies, the ultimate owners of these companies. But the system is in a way a like too sophisticated word for it, because it was simply that the Hungarian government put out huge public contracts for tender, a lot of them major infrastructure projects, that were then awarded either in bids where there were no other competitors to companies owned by Orban's friends, or to Orban's friends where the competition was apparently ignored. So, because he was in power for very long, the totals ran into the billions, right? Because it's kept happening year after year after year. Politically, the cover used was to say, this is my economic model, awarding public contracts to Hungarian companies. Who wouldn't want that? Who can't get behind that? A lot of the money was from the EU's budget, what the EU called structural funds, huge portions of it, actually. And in fact, around 2020, if I remember well, the EU suspended these contributions to the Hungarian government. And what we found, actually, the moment that suspension kicked in, Hungary just started spending more of its own money on these contracts to give to these same people. It's really striking and really kind of brazen, I would say. Yeah. But that is it. It's as simple as that.
Pieter, you really try to do something about corruption in Europe. And listening to this, what can the EU do against these sort of structures, not systems?
Well, first of all, what I miss in the Netherlands is a sort of discussion. I mean, we always start with the EU, but why do we start at the EU? Why don't we start at the national level? Why do we allow all these Russian oligarchs, and by the way, American tycoons, to have a tax rate which you would be jealous of with your salary? I mean, we make for an extremely nice fiscal climate for all these guys in the Netherlands. And you do as well in Malta. So it's always, what can someone else do? The first thing should be,
what can we do?
It's not only what do we do, but do we realize it in the end, it undermines your society at large. It undermines your society at large when big oligarchs have too much influence. Because what you see, they become close friends. This is one of the reasons why you want to have a register of lobbyists. You really want to know who influences the top voices in the cabinet. And we don't do that in the Netherlands. So we have no clue how big their influence is. So we had a prime minister saying he feels it in his veins. No, the CEO of Shell and Unilever were calling.
What does he feel in his veins?
Well, that there should be a zero tax on the dividend when he wanted to abolish that.
It was a feeling.
Yeah, it was a feeling, very strong feeling he had. And then we saw the SMSs, which we understand that it actually you feel an SMS going on in your pocket. So it is up to individual countries, and that's why the first question is, should we look at the EU? My answer would be no. Obviously, one of the problems I had in the Council of Europe, that there could be so much influence and so much people could be bought, that at the supranational level, there is even less control of politicians than there is at the national level. The national level is still interesting. But when I was in the Council of Europe, I was going to all the journalists in the Netherlands and saying, look, listen, do you see how corrupt they are? So when in 2017 I stood up, got 100 MPs to support me and said, I want an investigation. The investigation came. We kicked out for permanently 13 of these MP. 2 have been condemned to prison sentences. Both of them were my party chairman. So I give you that you don't have much fun if you actually ask for an investigation toward...
To your colleagues? Yeah.
No, your boss.
Your boss, yeah, okay. Yeah.
It's a subtle difference, I can tell you, when you try this one. It's always easier to do down than up in the hierarchy.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
So if anyone wants to understand why I got a burnout, this actually played a part in it.
Yeah.
And people don't realize that. But it was happening in plain sight. And Azerbaijan was actually preparing for war and actually went to war. Because Europe was saying, you don't have political prisoners. Europe had become dependent on gas, because the other thing you have to do if you're Russia or Azerbaijan is to make sure you can actually extort the other countries. Now, how do you do that? You make sure they buy something essential from you, which they can't buy anywhere else. Now, gas is the one thing. And they had this whole long-term path, and these politicians going, what I told you, they got all kinds of gifts and money for every vote. And we didn't see it. And it wasn't the only one thing happening, because while they went to Azerbaijan, the Secretary General, the President of the Assembly, went to Assad with a plane, together on a Russian plane, trying to make peace, which is totally ridiculous. At least it helped us getting rid of him, so that was the one positive thing of it. And the Secretary General spent more time with Jeffrey Epstein than Lebedev did with Boris Johnson.
I was going to ask you about that, because we speak about the former Prime Minister of Norway, Torbjørn Jagland. And then, but just take me to a regular day in the Council of Europe. How does that go? You sit at your office and you want to talk with your boss, and he's in Azerbaijan again. And then you have questions.
Hang on a second.
How does it work?
I have been trying for years, because he was not covering me up on Azerbaijan, to ask him, please tell me who you spoke and where you are.
You wanted just to know that of him?
Yeah.
Yes.
So I've asked that question 3 times at a sort of question time. 3 times. Question time, there is only 1 question, 1 answer. So well, any politician can give a non-answer. And any non-politician as well, by the way. And then it's finished. And I put it written there. I didn't even realize he was with Epstein. I only found out way later. So I could not get any information of him.
No.
And here I was going, because obviously what do you do if your boss is corrupt, gets millions? Then obviously at some point you try at the highest boss and say, look, listen, I need some help. So obviously I've been there. I've been at the boss of the European People's Parties in Brussels, Joseph Daul at that time, and for a private meeting with him, and said, yeah, look, listen, this is what's happening, and I need some support somewhere.
But it's just something I don't understand, because how did you know he was getting millions? How did you know he was corrupt? Was it only because he didn't share where he was and who he was speaking to?
Jagland?
Yeah, how did you know he was corrupt?
I did not know. The problem is, I did not know. And the problem with the Secretary General is he gets quite a nice salary.
Yes.
2 or 3 times what our Prime Minister gets. So it is, you can live well of it.
But why did you suspect him of being corrupt?
Because one of the Azerbaijan guys in the investigation said he had contact with Jagland. So that was my direct lead, in which I said, I want the minutes, because every time I had been to the Secretary General, there was what you were saying, what does the boss always have? A note taker. And I said, I want to have the notes of that meeting. I just want to know, what did you speak and what are the official notes of what you said? That's the only thing I need to know. And if those notes are sort of credible, then you go on. And of course, because he can see the ambassador of Azerbaijan, there's nothing particularly wrong with it. But he had said, no, that was where he was corrupted. I couldn't go any further. The other thing is, he had perfect immunity. All the guys had immunity. And by the way, only the Italians and the Germans prosecuted their politicians. The Belgians did not, and the Spanish did not. only the two countries that lost the Second World War, which totally reformed the public prosecutor, which therefore is pretty independent politically. Public prosecutors are not independent in many countries. So to get after politicians, you need a public prosecutor who's very courageous, and you need to lift immunity. Those are two extremely high hurdles.
Are they independent in the Netherlands?
No.
Okay.
No. We still have in the law that that actually the minister can give a direct order to the public prosecutor. What do you mean by independence?
That needs to go out.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Sure, it needs to go out. You can have the order to prosecute or not prosecute from the minister to the public prosecutor. I mean, yeah.
Okay.
But there's also formal and informal pressure. I mean,
Of course.
You don't need. I mean, if I'm your boss, I usually don't need to give you a formal order to do something.
No.
So the fact that these formal orders are not given doesn't mean these things don't happen. It's enough to have the authority and the ways of doing it. So it also depends on the kind of people you have. Yeah.
I want to move. You're going to give a short lecture, and then I want to move to Trump. And maybe just, is he an oligarch? Paul, what do you think?
Yes, actually. I think he kind of meets the definition.
Yeah?
His sons do. The people around him do. But then maybe he's, in the same way that Putin has created an oligarch class, Trump is doing the same.
Dus he's not necessarily an oligarch himself, maybe you would say, or maybe you would. But
Maybe
what he's creating is an oligarchy.
There's definitely a big oligarch class around him. Yeah.
Do you agree?
Oh, definitely an oligarch class, but he is a little bit of a failure if you look at his business dealings before he became president. Most oligarchs are also at least semi-competent businessmen.
He's not that.
He's not that. He's gone broke too often for that.
Well, Pieter Omtzigt, I asked you to shortly lecture us on two things. The misuse of technology by oligarchs, because this adds a new layer, but specifically also that you would ask us how to become a dictator.
Yeah.
Because that might be useful information
You've
for
been insisting on that bit.
all of us.
I don't know why.
I just think there's a whole new career path for me.
Oh, a whole new career path. Well, I left politics, so there is some room. You can try that. Yes. So you wanted to know how to become an oligarch. Actually, that's been a very popular course of late, to become a dictatorship, and there have been lots of very good students for this course. If you want to become a dictator, you have to do two things. The first thing you have to do is you have to make sure that you control all the state institutions. So I don't know whether you've already bought a few tanks or a few whatever. If you do a coup d'etat, you make sure you take over parliament. You can take over parliament by bribing, or you can take it over by force. Until now, you would take over the television. Maybe, since we're in Amsterdam, you would take over the Amsterdam Internet Exchange, which is one of the central nodes in the internet in Europe, and start controlling from there, because you want to have some censorship, and this is a very good place to start that censorship. You want to take over the courts. Now, we see how that's been doing. And this part has been the focus on a lot of research over the last 8 years. How can you prevent someone from taking that all over? And that goes back to 1933, the Ermächtigungsgesetz, the enabling law in Germany. After the Reichstag fire, Hitler tabled an extremely short law. It's about 1 page. It's got 4 articles. Article 1 is the government can also publish a law, which basically says it can publish a law without parliamentary assent. Secondly, the government can actually make laws which go against the constitution. Thirdly, the government can sign international treaties without them being ratified by parliament to be valid.
After that law had passed, that enabling law, there was one vote in the German parliament. There was a bit of hustling about and stuff, but he won the 2/3 majority he needed. He could next abolish all other political parties. So that was, you can actually say, to the moment, to the second, when Germany went from a democracy to a dictatorship. So everything we've done in the international law was to make sure that doesn't happen again. So we have a European Court of Human Rights where everyone can go. In Germany, you have a constitutional court where every citizen can go. And in the constitution, you have eternity clauses, which you cannot change. And there's an enormous list of work that has been done. The second bit you have to do to become a dictator was a difficult one. And what is the second bit you want? What do you want to do if you want to become a dictator? That's very important. You have to stay in power, because if you don't stay in power, then the one thing you can do is to make sure that your son stays in power. So that's why in Azerbaijan, we've got father, son, and probably now grandson. And in North Korea, we've got father, son, and we may actually go back to granddaughter. So you have to stay in power, or you have to hand over power to someone you can trust absolutely, otherwise it's the end of your life. It's one of the reasons Putin is so afraid. And how do you stay in power? Yes, you need a secret service. You need a sort of Stasi. You need to control the whole of you need a sort of KGB or an SS and an SD and a Gestapo, because you have to make sure that you know some of your political opponents, but if you want to stay in power, you know that there will be opponents you don't know yet of. So you need to control the whole of society. That has always been extremely difficult. So it took Stalin, it took Lenin, who actually Lenin had elections in the 1970s. He didn't even win them. He didn't care. He went on anyway after the October Revolution. But getting on the secret Russian police was more difficult. Setting up the Stasi, there were 92,000 people working full-time for the Stasi at the end of the DDR. So that's about as big as all the ministries you have. They needed hundreds of thousands of informants. It's both organizational a big drag, but it's also financially a big drag on your society, because 100,000 people doing something which in the end is not very productive. That part has become extremely easy of late. If you want to follow me, you take this phone, you make sure you install Pegasus on it, or anything you can eavesdrop on my phone. And once you've done that, you can follow whatever I'm doing. And I've talked to politicians who this happened to. This happened in Poland, this happened in Hungary, because that's the way you control your opposition. Once it's installed on here, you can, if you know what's on my phone, you know my finances, because I've got my banking app. You can hear everything I say. You can actually use the camera when I don't know, and you can use the microphone when I don't know, so you can follow everyone I talk to. You know where I am because I'm carrying this. So it's become extremely easy. And by the way, if you don't want this one, take my computer, take any screen, because any screen or any television right now has a camera and something to do. And if you don't have them, take any lawnmower, or take any doorbell, or take any Hoover, automatische stofzuiger. All of them you're now laughing, all of them have been used to actually hack them and go in your house. So in your house, I probably have about 10 to 15 apparatus which I can use for hacking, for knowing what you're doing, so I can actually know what you're doing without ever setting foot in your house. We've got the whole infrastructure for that. I can show you pictures in which in China this is being used to execute crimes against humanity against the Uyghurs. Facial recognition. We have these cameras hanging in many cities. And I can actually even follow you through the streets with the cameras. That's more than the Stasi has ever done. I just need to link it, and China has linked it. And since Snowden, we know that the Americans are doing that as well. What I'm saying is, if we don't take attention on this development, it will become extremely easy. We have a big monument here celebrating those few people who blew up the Amsterdam public records on who was Jew and who wasn't Jew. Because it was a stupidity that we actually registered that when the Germans could use that. Everything is registered now, everything. That's what we need to be working on, because if and by the way, I can do that without being in the Netherlands. So the Israelis, who often are sort of usually very good at eavesdropping, they say they actually had hacked all the cameras in Tehran and knew who was where in Tehran when they started bombing. So not only your own government can do it, but a foreign government can do it, and even a criminal agency or a terrorist agency. So my point is, if you want to become a dictatorship, you have to take a course in Silicon Valley, and you can get quite a bit at actually suppressing any kind of dissent you want. Why are these oligarchs so powerful? Well, the AI companies are so powerful because they have a number of powers. The first is they're incredibly big. If you look at the present size of, for instance, NVIDIA or Microsoft, Tesla has lost a bit of its value, but NVIDIA is worth 20% of GDP of the US. When Rockefeller's Standard Oil was worth 3% of GDP in 1911, it was split up in 29 parts because it was too powerful. Now we have a company which is 9 times as large compared to the industry. You really have to go back to either the English East India Company or obviously the Dutch VOC to have a company which is that powerful. These companies not only are economically powerful, they have the ear of the president, they don't pay taxes, but they also make the essential military equipment to do the bombing. Because the AI is an input you use for the war in Iran. AI is now being used everywhere, in Ukraine, in Gaza, in the Iran war. Not only that, they can also influence elections. You only talked about one of the 2 essential things which may have actually flipped the Brexit referendum. One of them is Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson actually wrote 2 pieces for his evening. One in favor. It was actually that close. One piece he wrote in favor of a Brexit and one against the Brexit, and we have both of them. Talking about non-principled politicians, Boris Johnson. But there was something else they needed, and that was Cambridge Analytica. Cambridge Analytica was being used to do micro-targeting using Facebook profiles of every citizen. You know exactly with everything you know. If I can see what you're looking at the internet, now formally I'm not allowed to know whether you're homosexual or heterosexual. I'm not allowed to know your political party affiliation. But if I look at your internet, what you're reading, I can make a pretty good guess, I can tell you. Yeah? So if you have a newsletter of COC, it's not that difficult to find out. I'm not talking about strange sites. It's just a general interest, what you're reading, if you have a different sexual orientation. There's nothing strange you have to do there. If we look at the recent research, the chatbots are actually more efficient in changing your opinion than politicians. Because you believe the chatbots and you don't believe the politicians. And that has been researched. The person writing the algorithm for the chatbot, it is not an algorithm which is kind of independent or neutral. If you say to the chatbot something, what's the best political party, you do get an answer. And if you ask the chatbot to have a map of China, I've tried this, for instance, all the chatbots give me a map of China, including Taiwan. And Taiwan is an independent country. But the chatbots know they have to do it, otherwise they don't stay friends with China. So there is a backdoor. So here we have companies which are big, have the ear of the president, can influence elections, and have the necessity capacity for military influence. And they're also transnational, so that means they have their money and their operations everywhere, because it's, for a politician, it's easier to tax a company with a physical factory than a company which only works in the internet, because the internet is everywhere and nowhere, basically. These companies are so incredibly powerful that they may, out of this power, actually be a big threat to democracy itself. And if we don't wake up to that in time, then we may actually find that the bosses of these companies are very powerful. And if you're not scared enough, you should read some of the works by especially Pieter Thiel. If you read Pieter Thiel, you think that Elon Musk is normal.
Thank you.
And that's where we are at the moment. So, was it the kind of lecture you wanted to be on how to become a dictator?
Please join
Thank
me.
you.
Thank you very much, Pieter. I think it's time. No, I was kidding. I was going to say let's go to solutions, but
We don't want to
no.
leave them.
But Paul, I was wondering, because you have also been writing on the Trump oligarchy and on the relationship that he has with tech bros, and you've been researching the same way as you've been researching Orban and where the money goes. You've been doing this with Trump as well. What do you recognize in the story of Pieter Omtzigt, and what worries you?
Oh, everything really about the US. It's funny. I wonder if in all this, what we're realizing is that we were all, for a long time, very reliant on norms in government rather than rules and systems. So the public prosecutor point is a really good one. I mean, look at how Trump is using the Department of Justice. The most kind of egregious example recently is getting it to investigate a woman a civil court found was raped by him. Not to mention James Comey, the former FBI director, and so on. And really, you think, what has changed constitutionally about the US under Trump? A lot. But actually, previous presidents could have done those things. They just didn't. I think he is using the machinery of the federal government to pursue his private interests. I think that's a totally uncontroversial thing to say. I think he's using the FBI in that way, the Department of Justice more broadly. Public procurement is being used in that way. So major federal contracts going to companies owned by Pieter Thiel and Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and all the people you'd expect. I think what's changed qualitatively under Trump is, while there's always been money in presidential politics in the US, the scale of it is now unprecedented. And the kind of things it buys you is unprecedented. So one of the first pieces we did was look at what donors are receiving, if anything, in exchange for their donations. And the answer is really extraordinary, really, if you stop to think about the implications of what they're getting. So things like presidential pardons for really serious crimes, companies donating money and having criminal investigations into them dropped, policy changes that benefit like really specific companies. The list goes on and on and on, and it's totally and openly transactional. And then on the point of him creating a kind of oligarch class, the greatest evidence for that comes in the form of his own family. So maybe not him, but certainly his sons. So Eric Trump and Don Jr. are involved in a number of companies whose interests perfectly align with presidential policy. For example, the Pentagon is contracting for loads of drones. His sons are getting involved with companies that make drones. You know, it's always like that. We keep seeing it time and time again. I think the worst case, though, comes in the form of their cryptocurrency projects, which is the kind of maybe the most naked profiteering from the presidential office the country's ever seen. So the Trump family launching cryptocurrencies in their own names that have no value beyond their association with the president.
There's one more question that I want to ask you both, because I think in Russian oligarchy, you see that there's always one big oligarch, and that's Putin. And everyone who was a threat to him, he has killed, even the one who was like a second father to him. He always gets them out of the way. And yesterday, I spoke with Michel Krielaars, and he said something interesting about this. He said at some point there was a situation when first in Russia the oligarchs were ruling and the president was sort of their puppet. And Putin switched that around. He is ruling and they all have to pay and they are all in service of him. And you can be in grace and you can be out of grace. And I was wondering about this with Trump, because Pieter, also what you said, you need two things. You need the institutions, but then you also need this mass surveillance system. But Trump doesn't have that.
Sorry?
Trump doesn't have the mass surveillance.
He has a mass surveillance system in a major way.
But he doesn't own it. Peter Thiel owns it.
Oh, no.
No?
The NSA, if you look at the revelations by Edward Snowden, since 2014 has done mass surveillance on American people. Now, the interesting thing is, in the United States, no one was bothered about the fact that they were doing mass surveillance on the whole of the world. But the American Constitution does not allow for mass surveillance on Americans. So that's what was the stupid thing there. So we know that the security agencies in the US are doing mass surveillance, and so we have now multiple layers of mass surveillance. So we have, on the one hand, the mass surveillance by especially NSA, but also by other government agencies. On the other hand, we have mass surveillance by private companies. And that mass surveillance can be either by storing all your internet data, and the mass surveillance can take indeed the form of biometrics and everything you want with the stuff Pieter Thiel is doing. But yes, you only need to have one of these systems to have a certain amount of control over the population.
And do you not think at some point the owners of the other system will become a threat to Trump?
Yeah, that's exactly the reason why Putin did what he did. Putin is an extremely capable politician. He made a misjudgment in how easy he could conquer Ukraine. But apart from that, he has known exactly how to get to power and how to keep power. And, well, it's actually quite interesting that for the first time after Mythos came out, Trump was actually reversing his policy 180 degrees, in which he said, I'm now going to make rules for AI. The first thing he'd done in the first week of becoming president was actually say, I want no rules for AI because I want to win the global AI race, and any rules for AI will actually hamper it, so here I go, get off with it. But I think he got a memo on his desk saying, look, listen, we're the United States, we have a federal government, and we have thousands of computers, and you bet if we're going to let Mythos go on our federal computer, we don't know which federal computer system breaks down, but at least one or two will completely break down. They're vulnerable. And whether that's a tech service or the social security system or whatever, it will do major damage. So actually, Trump, being a very able politician, has now a few things he has to take care of. The first thing he has to take care of, if he gets a predecessor who is not hurting him and his family. Now, he's obviously done a great deal, because I thought you would take another example, a great deal of actually suing his own tax service.
Oh, yeah.
Suing his own tax service because his tax returns had leaked.
Yeah.
He sued them, he got billions in compensation. That's not what he really needed, though it was nice. So the Attorney General, which is a sort of mixed form between the public prosecutor and the Minister of Justice, which is a form which you'll only see in Anglo-Saxon countries like Malta and the UK and the US, the acting one is his former lawyer. So talking about conflicts of interest, it's written large. Made a deal with Trump that he not only got a large amount of money, but also got a deal that there would never be any investigation by any government agency backwards and forwards into him, his family, and all the firms he owns. That is impunity. That's total impunity. So he now needs to make sure that that is being respected. He needs to make sure that he's not spending the rest of his life. The reason why Putin cannot resign, why Netanyahu cannot resign, is that they know that the rest of their life they will have court cases.
Yes.
And I am watching where Orban is going to live. I want to see whether he's actually fleeing before. I mean, you know, the Minister of Justice of Poland, Jobro, fled to Ukraine. And when Orban lost, he immediately fled to the US. Mind you, US is a sanctuary for those kinds now. So I want to see what happens to them. So he needs to make sure that that happens, so that his health and his wealth cannot be attacked. And that's actually quite difficult, because the one thing these people found very difficult, and that's in Azerbaijan, also in Russia, is the Russian constitution did have term limits. The one thing which was really difficult for Putin was actually changing the term limit so he could stay in power, because it did have a two-term limit, so he should have been out by 2008, and he changed the constitution. He changed it again in 2021. So now we can stay on as president until 2036. He will be 83 by that time, so he's over it. So Trump needs to make sure he makes enough changes that that the right people stay in power. And obviously, you are talking about takeover of institutions by Trump. Trump has not completed institutional takeover. So there is still quite a bit of resistance in institutions in the US, which he will find difficult to actually, I think. And whatever you can say about Orban, and you can say a lot about Orban, please be careful. In my worldview, you may think differently. Russia is here together with Azerbaijan and Turkey. No thing. Orban had elections which were losable. He lost them.
He lost them, yeah.
Yeah? He didn't, like on January the 6th in the US, challenge the result.
No.
He accepted the result. He might have tried to sort of not completely play by the rules, but it has not been a major effort. That's also the thing lying underneath there. And then the other thing, obviously, it is for exceptions that Trump got presidential pardons. Sometimes you have a sort of escape clause in your constitution. Presidential pardons are the sort of escape clause in the Constitution. Sometimes you need to use them one or twice as a president, because sometimes someone in your does something which in the end you don't want him to be punished for. But Trump sort of makes them tradable. He uses them for friends. If you give him a donation, you get a pardon. And so he uses the things he has for his own benefit. If you think that only happens in the US, I would like you to watch for 1 second to France and the UK. France has the escape clause in its constitution, in which the French parliament does not need to approve the budget. Article 49.3 of the French constitution. It was done because the Fourth Republic was so weak that there was a stalemate and nothing happened. So there is the way of the government to just pass a budget without anything. And the same thing happens, the same thing he can do for the budget of Social Security, which obviously in France is just about as big as the budget. There hasn't been a budget which has passed the normal way in France. So one of the essential things in a parliament, and we have in the Netherlands now as well, is having a budget, because just like at home, you always want to spend a lot and you don't want to tax. The French parliament does not take responsibility anymore for the state finances.
Yeah.
The UK is an interesting example. In the UK, the whole idea is you elect your prime minister. That's why you have elections. You don't have elections for your own MP. You elect whether you want Keir Starmer in Parliament in Downing Street number 10, or whether you want Kemi Badour, or whether you maybe want Nigel Farage. That's the real question. Now, as an escape clause, if one of them resigns, someone else takes over, because that's what you need for the continuity of your state. But it has become normal. Over the last 7 years, the UK has had 6 prime ministers. Liz Truss has never gone. Well, she was only there for about 6 weeks. Rishi Sunak has been prime minister for 2 years without an electoral mandate. So what we think as being normal, namely you elect politicians, you don't elect them anymore in the UK. The politicians make a debate and then approve a budget. That's not normal anymore in France. And politicians have to keep to the law themselves. That's not normal anymore in the US. So the crisis is a lot deeper than you think, and it is not just in the countries you look at.
Okay. I'm going to look at you if you want to ask a question. Yes, I'm coming towards you.
It was very interesting that you mentioned 1933 in Germany and the law that was adopted then that actually gave absolute power to Hitler.
Yeah.
I sort of felt the thing in America where Trump has organized his immunity and the immunity for his circle as well, and even into the future. I have a feeling it's a sort of the same type of moment. It allows them to proceed without the control of the law and without the control of politicians in America. So I see a parallel in those points. Do you agree?
The enabling law was far more far-reaching because Trump still cannot make laws without Congress. Having said that, Trump has made laws which go against the American Constitution. The American Constitution actually explicitly says that tariffs are being set by US Congress. Trump, if you look at the site of the White House, no longer lists that article on his site because he set tariffs himself. He lost the High Court case for that Supreme Court case for that particular case. But it's a big step what he did, and it's a big cheat. But there still is independent lawmaking in the US, and if Trump loses charge of either of the houses, he does have a major problem for the time for going on. And he still has a Supreme Court which supports his core policies, but still acts as a limit to powers, and that's what was shown in the case on the tariffs. So, yeah, I still don't think he's fully there. Do you think about it?
If there's not another question, okay, I'm coming to you as well, and that's...
2.5 weeks ago, Trump bought a lot of Dell Corporation stock. A week later, Dell has gotten an order from the Pentagon for $8.5 billion to produce AI or to deliver AI computers. After that point, the Dell stock rose 30%. The biggest beneficiary was Mr. Trump. But now you cannot sue them anymore. He cannot be brought to justice on this anymore because he has impunity. Or can he still be brought to justice? Because I read the news, and it was just mentioned. There was no comments on it. It was sort of a business as usual report on what happened.
Well, it is actually quite interesting to see how things have changed. So if you look back to the 1960s, Jimmy Carter sold his peanut farm for conflict of interest before he became President of the United States. But also, in Watergate, Richard Nixon had to resign for eavesdropping on his political opponents, whereas all politicians are doing it right now. So we've had a big decline in what you would call democratic ethos going forward. The amount of insider trading in the US is mind-boggling. You see the insider trades. When there is a big trade, from a certain trader, we don't know his name, we're almost certain that 10 minutes later we'll have an announcement on Trump on the Iran war. It is crazy ridiculous. If you'd made it up a few years ago, I would have laughed at your face. And yes, no one dares prosecuting him. And I've already seen the first ideas of floating how we can stay president. He can simply, because he can't be a candidate president, what he could be, the candidate vice president, and the president steps aside. There are wheels of... Sorry?
Putin did the same thing.
Well, no, Putin didn't actually. Putin actually stayed out of power for 4 years.
Maybe this one can continue
Yeah.
at the bar.
Yes, thank you.
Hold it, thank you.
So you said we should wake up before it's too late for AI, for the presidents of these companies, they will become too powerful. But I have a feeling that they are already too powerful and that we are too powerless already. Is there something we can still do?
Well, I think one of the things is here you can actually trust Trump. Because Trump himself knows anything. If anything he needs is to stay the absolute boss, just like Putin stays. So the one thing he will not allow is that these companies will become more powerful than he is. That's the same thing which you can trust him in. Do we need to do something? Yes, we do need to do something. I think we need to develop independence from these AI companies very quickly. That's why I wrote that piece in the Volkskrant saying, why on earth are we actually selling the cloud in which we store DigiD and the berichtenbox of the government to an American cloud? We need to have some form of autonomy from American big tech. That's something we urgently need to do, because I was saying we need to be independent from Russian gas, but we also need to be less dependent on big tech. And yeah.
Paul, maybe this question for you as well. Something we can do. You're working very hard on trying to uncover these stories.
So yeah, as a reporter, I'm always wary on providing policy advice. I would say it is a real concern. So when we look at donations to Trump and Trump super PACs, you know, these vehicles they use to raise money, the biggest donations by far come from the tech companies. So Greg Brockman and his wife, so Greg Brockman, the co-founder of OpenAI, recently donated $25 million to MAGA Inc., a super PAC that was used to promote Trump's presidency, but is still, for mysterious reasons, still being used to raise money now. So the real speculation happening is, what is the money for, right? And it goes to what you were saying. Who will this super PAC support next? Will it be one of his sons? Will it be one of his allies, and so on? I agree with Pieter that in the end, Trump will never allow a situation where they're more powerful than him. What that means for us is fine. They're not as powerful as Donald Trump, but maybe we don't like that either. I think ultimately society needs to ask itself how involved it wants AI in its life, in its daily life. But I don't, you know what I mean? I have no kind of policy advice for you, I'm afraid.
Thank you all very much for being here and listening to this not super uplifting stories. Well, it's the truth. Let's have a drink. Thank you both very, very much for
Thank you so much.
being here. And also for the work that you do, because both of you have really also seen and experienced the consequences of trying to unravel corruption and what it does. So I think that's incredibly brave. So thank you both very, very much for being here. And I hope to see you again soon. Good evening, and I hope to see you as well soon. Good night.
Thank you so much.